There's a Northeast state where every taxpayer would need to write a personal check for $44,500 just to settle the state's existing bills, where the gap between what the state owes and what it has in the bank reached $61.8 billion, where the unfunded pension liability sits at 147.6% of own source revenue, and where the local conversation continues to celebrate a rainy day fund of $4.1 billion as if that solves anything. The state is Connecticut, and it's not even the worst on this list. Across America's Northeast corridor, the fiscal story of 2026 has been quieter and stranger than the headlines suggest. Not the coastal boom cities where housing kept climbing. The Northeast states, quietly running out of money, quietly losing residents, quietly watching their fiscal architecture compress alongside their demographic contraction. According to Truth in Accounting's 2025 Financial State of the States report, 3 of the 5 worst-graded states in America are in the Northeast corridor. According to Census Bureau Vintage 2025 estimates, the Northeast recorded sustained net domestic outmigration for years, with the international migration slowdown of 2024 to 2025 revealing the underlying pattern. According to Reason Foundation's 2024 Annual Pension Solvency Report, pension debt per capita in Northeast states ranks among the highest in America. According to Adams' 2026 Property Tax Analysis, Northeast states rank disproportionately among the highest effective property tax rates in America. And underneath those numbers, the pattern is not subtle. Structural shortfalls that dwarf annual budgets. Residents leaving, property taxes climbing, pension obligations growing, federal workforce reductions rippling through state economies, insurance carrier pressure hitting coastal and inland markets, credit rating downgrades landing across major metros, property tax bills climbing double digits in a single year. In this countdown, we're exposing 10 Northeast states quietly collapsing in 2026 while nobody is watching. Not the cliché version where every Northeast state is in trouble. The real one. The version where Truth in Accounting audited balance sheets, Census Bureau outmigration data, Reason Foundation pension analysis, and Adam property tax records show sustained multi-year deterioration in Northeast corridor states. One state on this list carries the second highest taxpayer burden in America at $44,500 per resident. Another had property tax bills jump 18% in a single year, the largest one-year increase in America. A third has federal workforce reductions producing localized fiscal shock the state economy was not built to absorb. A fourth had its population outright decline in 2024-2025. A fifth saw structural shortfall reach $61.8 billion at the close of FY 2024. Subscribe before your state's next fiscal audit lands. Like the video if you live in the Northeast and have watched neighbors leave for the Carolinas year after year. Let's break it down. Number 10. Maine. The Pine Tree State where population growth has moderated to negligible levels, where the median resident age is the oldest in America, and where the fiscal architecture faces demographic contraction alongside pension pressure. There's a state where population growth reached only 3,000 in 2024 to 2025, where the median age of 45.1 is the oldest in America, where pension obligations continue to compound against a demographic base that is not growing, and where the property tax burden has climbed alongside the aging population. Welcome to Maine. The numbers. Maine population growth reached only 3,000 in the year ending July 2025, per census, vintage 2025. Maine median resident age is 45.1, the oldest of any U.S. state. Maine property tax effective rate ranks among the top 10 in America. Maine. A natural change turned negative in 2023, with deaths exceeding births. Maine fiscal architecture depends increasingly on federal support as the demographic base contracts. Maine coastal insurance costs have climbed alongside broader New England trends. What it's like. Living in Maine is like dating someone with real character and history whose calendar has quietly emptied out. Picture this. You're a 52-year-old Portland, Maine resident in 2026. Your neighborhood has multiple homes for sale that have not moved. Your local school district faces sustained enrollment decline. Your neighbor at the hospital mentioned that staffing shortages continue. Your kids left for Boston in the 2010s, where it gets uncomfortable. Maine's structural problem is that the aging demographic base cannot support the growing pension and healthcare obligations without sustained external support. The population is not growing. The deaths now exceed the births. The tax base is not expanding. The obligation base continues to grow. Sharp contrast. Maine and North Carolina are both coastal states. North Carolina has grown its population and tax base substantially since 2015. Maine has not. Same coast, opposite demographic trajectories. Number 9. Rhode Island. The ocean state, where the smallest state in the lower 48 carries one of the largest per-taxpayer burdens, where median home prices have separated from wage growth, and where the outmigration has continued at sustained rates. There's a state where every taxpayer carries an $8,500 burden, where pension obligations have compounded against a small economic base, where the median home price separated from the local wage structure years ago, and where the regional Northeast fiscal pressure has hit Rhode Island as hard as states 20 times its size. Welcome to Rhode Island. The numbers. Rhode Island carries a taxpayer burden of $8,500 per resident per truth in accounting 2025. Rhode Island, net domestic migration was negative 1,551 in the year ending July 2025 per census vintage 2025. Rhode Island median home price has climbed past $450,000. Rhode Island property tax burdens rank among the highest in New England. Rhode Island pension system carries significant unfunded liabilities. Rhode Island working age migration to North Carolina and Florida has accelerated. What it's like. Living in Rhode Island is like dating someone with charming quirks whose budget situation has been quietly worsening for years. Picture this. You're a 38-year-old teacher in Providence in 2026. Your salary is fine. Your rent is $2,400. Your property tax bill on a starter home would consume nearly $8,000 a year. Your sister moved to North Carolina in 2023, and her property tax is half yours. Where it gets uncomfortable. Rhode Island's structural problem is that the state's small economic base produces less revenue elasticity than larger states with similar pension obligations. The reforms have been substantial. The economic capacity to absorb the obligations remains limited. The result is sustained outflow of working-age residents. Sharp contrast. Rhode Island and New Hampshire are both small New England states. New Hampshire has no state income tax and a taxpayer burden under $700. Rhode Island carries an $8,500 burden. Same region, very different fiscal frameworks. Number 8. Vermont. The Green Mountain State, where the smallest population in New England carries one of the largest per-taxpayer fiscal burdens in America, and the property tax effective rate ranks third highest in America. There's a state where every taxpayer carries a $12,500 burden, where property tax effective rate reaches 1.4%, the third highest in America, where the small economic base limits revenue elasticity, and where the structural pension obligations have compressed alongside the broader Northeast fiscal pattern. Welcome to Vermont. The numbers. Vermont carries a taxpayer burden of $12,500 per resident per truth in accounting 2025. Vermont property tax effective rate reached 1.40%, the third highest in America per Adam 2026. Vermont population declined by 1,800 in the year ending July 2025 per census, vintage 2025. Vermont median household income sits roughly in the middle of national rankings. Vermont pension system has been working through structural reform measures. Vermont taxpayer burden per capita ranks first in America when adjusted for population. What it's like. Living in Vermont is like dating someone earnest, beautiful, surrounded by forests, and quietly maxing out their credit cards. Picture this. You're a 52-year-old in Burlington in 2026. Your property tax on a $400,000 home is over $20,000 a year. Your salary is fine but not high enough to absorb the tax without compression. Your retired neighbors moved to Florida last year. You're starting to research a similar move, where it gets uncomfortable. Vermont's structural problem is that the state's lifestyle premium has been funded by tax structures unsustainable against the small economic base. The reforms have been substantial. The structural conditions have continued to compound. The population declined outright in 2024-2025. Sharp contrast. Vermont and New Hampshire are direct neighbors. New Hampshire has no state income tax and burden under $700. Vermont carries a $12,500 burden. Same region, opposite fiscal frameworks. Hey, before we get into the top 7, the states we're about to cover are the ones where the Northeast fiscal deterioration has been most extensively documented in Truth in Accounting's Financial State of the States 2025 report, in Census Bureau Vintage 2025 estimates, and in Reason Foundation pension analysis. If this list has been useful, hit subscribe, because the next one is 10 American cities where the property tax bill just doubled, and you'll want to see if your city is on the list. Like the video if you live in the Northeast and are considering leaving. Drop a comment if you're planning your Northeast corridor exit. Now let's keep going. Number 7. New Hampshire. The granite state that markets itself as the no-income tax sanctuary while quietly carrying the 5th highest property tax effective rate in America, and the retirement migration model faces sustained cost pressure. There's a state where the effective property tax rate reached 1.29%, the 5th highest in America, where the small population spreads the local cost across fewer residents, where median home price has climbed past $480,000, and where retirees who moved from Massachusetts for tax relief have discovered the math is closer than expected. Welcome to New Hampshire. The numbers. New Hampshire effective property tax rate reached 1.29%, the 5th highest in America per Adam 2026. New Hampshire has no state income tax, driving significant retirement migration from Massachusetts. New Hampshire local property taxes fund the vast majority of municipal and school services. New Hampshire median home price has climbed past $480,000, expanding the assessment base. New Hampshire population growth has moderated substantially from pandemic-era peaks. What it's like. Living in New Hampshire is like dating someone who proudly told you they had no debt and forgot to mention the rent on the apartment. Picture this. You're a 67-year-old retiree in southern New Hampshire in 2026. You moved from Massachusetts in 2019 specifically for the income tax savings. Your home value climbed 38% since you bought. Your property tax bill climbed 41% over the same window. The income tax savings cover roughly half the property tax increase. Where it gets uncomfortable. New Hampshire's structural problem is that the no-income tax framework has been quietly offset by property tax intensity the marketing minimizes. The income tax savings are real. The property tax burden is also real. For households with modest incomes and high-value homes, the property tax intensity exceeds the income tax savings. Sharp contrast. New Hampshire and Vermont are direct neighbors with very different fiscal architectures. Vermont has state income tax and 1.40% property tax rate. New Hampshire has no income tax but 1.29% property tax rate. Same New England geography, very different revenue mixes. Number 6. Pennsylvania. The Keystone State where net domestic migration reached negative 30,718 in 2024 to 2025, where the property tax structure compresses households across the state, and where the fiscal reserves have been drawn down across multiple cycles. There's a state where every taxpayer carries a $9,400 burden, where net domestic migration was negative 30,718 in the year ending July 2025. Where bank branches declined 9.8% relative to 2019, and where the broader Northeast fiscal pattern has hit Pennsylvania as hard as any state. Welcome to Pennsylvania. The numbers. Pennsylvania carries a taxpayer burden of $9,400 per resident per Truth in Accounting 2025. Pennsylvania pension system is funded at approximately 66% per Reason Foundation 2024. Pennsylvania net domestic migration was negative 30,718 in the year ending July 2025. Pennsylvania effective property tax rate reached 1.24% in 2025. Pennsylvania state budget reserves have been drawn down across multiple cycles. Pennsylvania fiscal deterioration continues to accelerate outmigration to the Carolinas and Tennessee. What it's like. Living in Pennsylvania is like dating someone with a six-figure salary who still hits you with a Venmo request to split the appetizer. Picture this. You're a 51-year-old in suburban Pittsburgh in 2026. Your home value is steady. Your property tax climbed 8% in 2025 and 6% in 2026. Your kids moved to Charlotte and Nashville for work. Your retired friends keep moving to Florida, where it gets uncomfortable. Pennsylvania's structural problem is when a state this large runs thin, it does not announce with press conferences. It announces with delayed infrastructure, hiring freezes, and slow service trims. The reserves keep shrinking. The migration outflow continues. Sharp contrast. Pennsylvania and Tennessee tell two stories. Tennessee carries a taxpayer surplus of $10,900. Pennsylvania carries a $9,400 burden. Same general region. Very different fiscal management. Number 5 on Virginia, the old Dominion state where federal workforce reductions in 2025 rippled through the local tax base, and the fiscal architecture faces the same federal-adjacent pressure that hit Maryland and D.C. There's a state where federal employment concentration has been substantial, where the 2025 federal workforce reductions produced localized fiscal shock across the Northern Virginia corridor, where property tax pressure has climbed, and where the migration outflow has accelerated among federal-adjacent professionals. Welcome to Virginia. The numbers. Virginia federal employment concentration ranks among the highest in America. Virginia 2025 federal workforce reductions substantially reduced Northern Virginia tax base. Virginia effective property tax rate has climbed alongside broader regional trends. Virginia pension system has been under sustained reform pressure. Virginia migration outflow has accelerated among federal-adjacent professionals in 2025-2026. Virginia Northern Virginia housing market has softened as federal contractor uncertainty persists. What it's like. Living in Virginia is like dating someone whose federal employer just announced a reorganization and the wedding is next month. Picture this. You're a 43-year-old federal contractor in Northern Virginia in 2026. Your contract was reduced. Your property tax bill climbed alongside the assessment. Your commute costs continue to climb. Your spouse mentions Charlotte or Tampa weekly, where it gets uncomfortable. Virginia's structural problem is that the federal employment base that supported the local tax structure has been reduced faster than the fiscal architecture could adjust. The workforce reductions produce revenue reductions. The obligations do not adjust at the same pace. The compounding effect landed in 2025 and continues. Sharp contrast. Virginia and North Carolina are direct neighbors. North Carolina has diversified employment beyond federal. Virginia has heavier federal-adjacent concentration. Same region, very different post-2024 outcomes. Number 4, Maryland. The free state where property tax bills jumped 11.6% in a single year, the second largest one-year increase in America, and federal workforce reductions have compounded household budget pressure. There's a state where property tax bills climbed 11.6% between 2024 and 2025, where $145,000 federal civilian employees rank third highest concentration in America, where net domestic migration was negative $8,525 in 2024 to 2025, and where Charles County ranked among the riskiest housing markets in America in Adam Q1 2026. Welcome to Maryland. The numbers. Maryland property tax bills climbed 11.6% between 2024 and 2025 per CBS News reporting on Adam. Maryland has approximately $145,000 federal civilian employees, third highest in America. Maryland taxpayer burden reached $11,100 per resident per Truth in Accounting 2025. Maryland net domestic migration was negative $8,525 in the year ending July 2025. Maryland, Charles County ranked among the riskiest housing markets in America per Adam Q1 2026. Maryland, Montgomery County, and Prince George's County reassessment outcomes concentrated the pressure. What it's like. Living in Maryland is like dating someone with prestigious connections, a federal job that was supposed to be permanent, and bills that keep climbing regardless. Picture this. You're a 45-year-old federal contractor in suburban Maryland in 2026. Your contract has been reduced. Your property tax bill arrived 11.6% higher than last year. Your home insurance bill arrived in April with similar growth. Your spouse mentions Pennsylvania, just an hour north. Where it gets uncomfortable. Maryland's structural problem is that the property tax increase hit households at the same time federal employment changes compressed income. The reassessment cycles caught up to pandemic-era home values. The federal workforce reduction started landing in 2025. The combination has produced household budget compression. Sharp contrast. Maryland and Virginia are neighboring states with similar federal dependence. Virginia's property tax growth was smaller. Maryland's 11.6% jump was outsized. Same federal adjacent geography, very different 2025 outcomes. Number 3. Delaware. The first state that became the worst state in America for one-year property tax growth, with bills climbing 18% between 2024 and 2025, and the taxpayer burden reached $15,700 per resident. There's a state where property tax bills climbed 18% in a single year, the largest statewide one-year increase in America, where the taxpayer burden reached $15,700, where 64 bank branches closed in Q1 2026, and where the gap between corporate banking Delaware and consumer Delaware widened to absurd proportions. Welcome to Delaware. The numbers. Delaware property tax bills climbed 18% between 2024 and 2025 per CBS News, largest one-year increase in America. Delaware taxpayer burden reached $15,700 per resident per Truth in Accounting 2025. Delaware had 64 bank branch closures in Q1 2026, most of any state despite tiny size. Delaware maintains AAA credit ratings due to corporate entity revenue. Delaware residents absorbed the increase while corporate registration revenue continued to Wilmington. Delaware population growth slowed substantially in 2024-2025. Reddit quote, Delaware is the state where the corporate banking is booming, the bank branches are closing, the property taxes just jumped 18%, and the residents are starting to wonder which Delaware they live in. What it's like. Living in Delaware is like dating someone with impressive credentials whose personal finance doesn't match the public image. Picture this. You're a 56-year-old in suburban Delaware in 2026. Your property tax bill jumped from $3,200 in 2024 to $3,776 in 2025. Your local bank branch closed in February. Your state hosts more Fortune 500 legal homes than any other state. The contrast is starting to feel structural, not coincidental, where it gets uncomfortable. Delaware's structural problem is the most extreme illustration of the gap between corporate prosperity and consumer fiscal stress. The corporate side is booming. The consumer property tax just jumped 18%. The consumer banking sector is collapsing. The two coexist within the same state because they involve almost entirely different financial systems. Sharp contrast. Delaware and Maryland are neighbors. Maryland's 2024-2025 property tax increase was 11.6%. Delaware's 18% increase was the largest in America. Same mid-Atlantic geography, Delaware led the country in one-year shock. Number 2. Washington, D.C. The district where federal workforce reductions in 2025 rippled through the local tax base at the same time, the district faced a credit rating downgrade, and the compounding effect has been the most sudden of any Northeast Corridor territory. There's a district that experienced a credit rating downgrade in the December 2024 to April 2025 window, where federal workforce reductions in 2025 substantially reduced local tax base, where the compounding effect of federal cuts and structural expenses has produced immediate fiscal pressure, and where residents are absorbing service reductions. Welcome to Washington, D.C. The numbers. Washington experienced a credit rating downgrade in the December 2024 to April 2025 window per S&P Global. Washington federal workforce reductions in 2025 substantially reduced local tax base. Washington fiscal architecture depends heavily on federal adjacent employment and property tax base. Washington municipal budget projections show sustained multi-year deficits. Washington service categories, including transportation and parks, absorbed budget reductions. Washington federal adjacent housing prices have softened as federal employment declined. What it's like. Living in Washington is like dating someone with prestigious connections whose employer just announced a reorganization. Picture this. You're a 41-year-old Washington resident in 2026. Your federal contractor spouse took a buyout in March. Your neighborhood library reduced hours. Your bus frequency was cut on your commute route. Your local school district announced a program consolidation. Where it gets uncomfortable. Washington's structural problem is that the federal employment base has been reduced faster than the fiscal architecture could adjust. The federal reductions produce revenue reductions. The obligations do not adjust at the same pace. The compounding effect landed in 2025 and continues. Sharp contrast. Washington and Nashville tell two stories. Nashville has grown its economic base while Washington has compressed. Same country, very different 2025-2026 trajectories. Number 1. Connecticut. The Constitution state where every taxpayer carries a $44,500 burden, tied with New Jersey for the worst in America, where the structural shortfall reached $61.8 billion, and where the pension unfunded liability represents 147.6% of own-source revenue. There's a state where every taxpayer carries a $44,500 burden, where the structural shortfall reached $61.8 billion at the close of FY 2024. Connecticut pension debt per capita reaches $10,151, second highest in America, where the fiscal guardrails since 2017 have produced progress that the magnitude of the shortfall dwarfs, and where the historic prosperity of Fairfield County masks state-level fiscal deterioration. Welcome to Connecticut. The numbers. Connecticut carries a taxpayer burden of $44,500 per resident, tied worst in America per Truth in Accounting 2025. Connecticut's structural shortfall reached $61.8 billion at the close of FY 2024. Connecticut pension debt per capita reaches $10,151, second highest in America per Reason Foundation. Connecticut pension unfunded liability of $37 billion represents 147.6% of own source revenue. Connecticut net domestic migration was negative 17,224 in the year ending July 2025. Connecticut historic prosperity of Fairfield County masks state-level fiscal deterioration. Reddit quote. Connecticut is the state where the $4.1 billion rainy day fund gets celebrated, while the audit shows a $61.8 billion shortfall, and the local conversation calls it fiscal responsibility. What it's like. Living in Connecticut is like dating someone with old money, very specific tastes, and a habit of insisting the rainy day fund means everything is under control. Picture this. You're a 51-year-old finance professional in Fairfield County in 2026. Your home value is up. Your property tax bill is up faster. Your firm has been hiring more aggressively in Florida. Your boss bought a place in Palm Beach. The legislature celebrated the $4.1 billion rainy day fund, while the audit showed $61.8 billion shortfall. Where it gets uncomfortable. Connecticut's structural problem is that the fiscal guardrails since 2017 have produced measurable progress, but the magnitude of the historic shortfall has continued to overwhelm the pace of reform. The reforms have been substantial. The $61.8 billion gap has not been closed by an order of magnitude. The structural conditions remain in place. Sharp contrast. Connecticut and New Hampshire are New England neighbors. New Hampshire's taxpayer burden is under $700. Connecticut's is $4,500. Same region, opposite balance sheets. The Connecticut to Florida migration corridor among finance professionals has expanded substantially since 2020, so there it is. 10. Northeast states quietly collapsing in 2026 while nobody is watching. On the public record, in Truth in Accounting's Financial State of the States 2025 report, in Census Bureau Vintage 2025 estimates, in Reason Foundation pension analysis, and in Adam Q1 2026 property tax analysis. States where pension obligations have compounded for decades. States where property tax bills have jumped double digits in a single year. States where the federal workforce reductions rippled through the local tax base. States where net domestic migration has been negative for years. States where the audited balance sheet shows what the official budget rhetoric obscures. The Northeast states with stable fiscal positions in 2026 share specific characteristics. They have functional pension architectures, growing economic bases, moderated obligation growth, and demographic patterns that retain working-age residents. The 10 states on this list have varying combinations of the opposite conditions. Some are absorbing federal reduction shocks for the first time. Others have been absorbing pension pressure for decades. The gaps grew. The migration continued. The property taxes climbed. The residents left. If this list helped, share it with the friend who lives in the Northeast and keeps insisting the fiscal picture is fine. The migration corridors from Northeast to Southeast that opened in the 2010s have expanded in 2024 to 2025. The Northeast corridor states are absorbing the consequences. Hit subscribe because next we're breaking down 10 American cities where the property tax bill just doubled. Drop a comment if you're planning your Northeast corridor exit. And remember, the worst state-level collapse isn't the loud one with the bailout headlines. It's the quiet one, where the audit report lands, the balance sheet shows $61.8 billion, and the local conversation calls the $4.1 billion rainy day fund a solution.